Thank you, folks, for joining us. My name is Greg Stiegel. I'm the Operations Director here at Renewable Energy Alaska Project. And we have a great event for you today, a little bonus speaker series event. Thanks to my colleague, Chris McConnell here, who's been working in this space. So before we introduce the event, I just want to start with a land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you from my home in Anchorage, South Anchorage, and REAP staff live and work on the traditional and unceded lands of the Dena'ina people. And we recognize the thousands of years of stewardship that these people have had over these lands. I'd like to invite everybody to introduce yourselves using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. So please go ahead and let us know where you're coming from. And if you could use the native lands that you're on, if you're unsure of which native lands you're on, you can use this link, native-land.ca. And when you're using the chat function, make sure you select that you're speaking to everyone, not just the panelists and hosts, so we can all see who's on the call. And while we do that, I will take care of a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. We will be posting the video on our YouTube page after the event, so you'll be able to share this with anybody who you think might be interested in hearing about what we're talking about today. I'll be sure to send that link along with some other details after the event to your email address, so keep an eye out for that. We'll also be taking questions throughout the event. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen there's a Q&A feature, so please use that to ask questions, not the chat function. It's just easier for us to track it that way. And just fire away whenever you have a question, plop it in the Q&A feature there, and then we'll pick them up as we go. Maybe a couple of them that might be answered in writing, or we'll save a few for the end. So we'll save some time at the end for dedicated questions and answers. Hopefully we have a bunch of them today. So just before we get started, a quick introduction on REAP. REAP is a 501c3 nonprofit. We were founded in 2004, and we're a coalition. We've got 70 dues-paying members or so, a bunch of donors and supporters around the state and also across the country and worldwide. Our mission, broadly speaking, is to advance clean energy in Alaska, and we define clean energy as both renewable energy and energy efficiency. And definitely head over to our website, realaska.org, to learn more about who we are. Our work, we often talk about clean energy in these four categories here to be able to produce and enhance and create more clean energy. You need kind of each of these pieces. Today's event, obviously, we're going to be focusing on the technology piece a little bit, as well as the people piece. But we largely don't work in the technology space. We don't have engineers on our staff. We're not creating technology, but we're doing things like this event and interpreting technology and trying to demonstrate how it can help our cause. A few of the other areas we work in: funding, policy, people. These are obviously important factors for more clean energy development. You need money to create new projects. You need sound policies, and obviously the people to keep it all running. So again, I'm not going to run through our, all of our initiatives. realaska.org would be a great place to check out everything we're working on. And I think I am going to just mention one last thing and then kick things off, because we do have quite a bit to cover here. Our next speaker series event is going to be next Wednesday, March 30th. At the same time, we'll be talking about the Rail Belt Reliability Council. This is a new organization that REAP has been part of standing up over the past 18 months or so, that's going to create an electric reliability organization for the Rail Belt region of Alaska. This is a big project we've been working on, and the application is being submitted on Friday. So a timely event to discuss that. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Chris McConnell here. Chris is the director for the Alaska Network for Energy, Education, and Employment. a REAP program. And he has been working with all these folks here you see on your screen, and I'll turn it over to you now, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Greg, and welcome to everybody watching and listening in here, and welcome to Glenn Hodges, Richard, Webb, Arthur Jensen, and Jay Byam. I appreciate you guys being here and all the sort of things I've learned from you. So XR in AK, Extended Reality in Alaska. I'm going to lead in with my program a little bit, Alaska Network of Energy, Education, and Employment. And part of my mission is to task where anybody is getting energy literacy or training in the state and looking at outside curriculum, what other people are doing in different jurisdictions, and how Alaskans can increase their energy literacy, improve their energy training and human capacity. So that takes a look in the K through 12 realm, the CTE, career and technical education, vocational training, and at the university level too, and linking career pathways. And that entails bringing a lot of different organizations together, creating some mapping and letting folks talk to each other about what they're doing in this space. And so that is what brought me into extended reality, and we'll get into what exactly we mean by that in a second. I'm going to give a little introduction of my sort of understanding of this space. Imagine starting a business in a region larger than France, Spain, Germany, and Italy combined, but with only 0.03% of that combined population. Now imagine that 20% of this very small population is off the road system, broadband is limited, that energy costs are among the highest in the United States, and that the region is home to some of the most extreme environments on the planet. Identifying the barriers and challenges to doing business in Alaska is the easy part of doing business in Alaska. These three Alaskan businesses that are working in the extended reality space have the potential to make a transformative impact on complex challenges posed by logistics, operations, and increasing human capacity. Designori, Totalview, and Kartorium are all Anchorage-based companies with Alaskan founders whose work falls along the various points in the spectrum of XR technology. I'm going to jump in and introduce Glenn Hodges first, and hopefully Glenn can sort of set the table for us in terms of what we mean by XR. Glenn is a retired lieutenant colonel, 28-year veteran in the U.S. Army, and has spent 20 years as a simulation operations officer. Glenn earned his MS and PhDs in modeling virtual environments and simulation from the Naval Postgraduate School, and his research is centered around system interoperability and what some call cybercology, the study of the human, tech, and environment intersection. His current research is focused on the use of field of light displays to enhance situational awareness and decision-making and the improvement of human representations in constructive simulations. Glenn is currently a research professor at the Naval Postgraduate School and a consultant in XR technologies out of Monterey, California. Glenn, before you define that for me, because part of Annie's world here is career pathways. How did a colonel in the Army end up in the XR world?
I was an armor officer, and I spent a lot of time in my early years having to sit inside a simulator because the unit I was assigned to didn't have the money to actually go shoot live rounds. And so it's funny because not every unit in the Army is funded at the same level. And so I just happened to land in one of those units that was the low man on the totem pole. So in order for us to get trained and in order for us to gain experience in our tasks, we spent a lot of time using simulations and virtual reality and simulators to practice the skills and decision-making techniques that we would need on the battlefield someday. And so then I fell into it. After that point, it was having used it at a very young age and getting used to it, I had to make a decision point in my career where I would either stay as an operational officer or I would go into a functional area, a specialty area. And I kind of looked at the functional area as being more appropriate for post-employment, as well as an interesting space to be able to use my my operational experience to be able to help shape and guide the use and development of technology for the future Army. So that's kind of how I ended up there.
Sounds good. So get right into it. What do people mean when they talk about XR, extended reality?
So we talk about extended reality, we're talking about the intersection or use of what I like to call integrated technology environments, where you have augmented reality, virtual reality, you have computer simulations that are nothing more than just watching a screen and entities moving around on a screen, or agent-based simulations, where you're able to take all of those different types and forms of models and bring them together to create environments in order to do things like create learning pathways, or to assess performance, or to experiment on new capabilities, or design and develop new capabilities.
And so could you maybe give us, just for a distinction, so when people talk about there's in real life, as the kids say, and what would be an example of augmented reality?
So augmented reality today, a lot of children are running around with their headsets on and playing, when I used to play with Wii, tell how old I am, right? So the HoloLens, so the augmented reality capabilities that you have today, what they do is they take the outside world, you can see the outside world, and they overlay a layer of synthetic information over top of what you can really see in the real world. And that's augmenting your reality. Your virtual reality is where you're encompassed inside of your headset, or you're sitting playing a video game, whatever, Minecraft, whatever you're interested in, and becoming immersed in that virtual world. And then you have those of us that do analysis and things that use computer programs, mathematical programs, computational programs to actually look at strategies and concepts and things like that, which is what we call in the military, we call that the constructive world. Now, when you start talking about extended reality or XR or mixed reality, what we've started to see is we've started to see organizations that now take the virtual reality component of the headset, and now they lay a layer of augmented reality on top of the virtual reality. So you can, in fact, be in a completely virtual world, say in the hangar of an airport working on a plane, and at the same time, someone can be instructing you on how to put together parts for a repair using augmented reality inside that virtual world. So that is what I have come to know as this blended or mixed or XR type of reality. And I see that you've put up this graphic, and I think one of the other, Richard's probably going to talk a little bit more about the scale that he works with, the spectrum of realities. But that's a good piece. And the one piece that I didn't talk about, which you have on there, is that real life, which, from a military guy's perspective, real life to me is, simply put, it's I grab my rubber weapon, because I don't want to take my real weapon out in the mud and get it dirty, because then I have to clean it, right? So I take my rubber model of my weapon and I go right out into the woods and I do those real world things. I practice those real world things in the real world, but I still have some models or some simulations. An example would be that rubber rifle, right? That model of the real thing that I'm using in place of, so that it's still a mix of different types of realities. It's the real world, but sometimes there are just certain things you can't do in the real world safely or economically. And so we abstract those things using technologies, and they can be anything from a broomstick to a supercomputer, to be able to allow us to have that extended reality.
Thank you, Glenn. Yeah, and this graphic we have up, I've seen Richard's spectrum, which I think is probably more interesting, but I felt like this is a good one to sort of frame things for now, and I'm looking forward to Richard's explanation there. But I'm going to go to Arthur Jensen next. Arthur is the CEO and founder of Totalview. And through a fortuitous meeting in our REAP offices, my colleague Colleen Fisk was working on some education ideas and was in a meeting with Arthur, and I got pulled in, and at first thought it was a sales type thing, but Arthur showed me, sort of introduced me to this space. So I'm grateful to him, and we've collaborated on a few things since then. And I think that Alaska Energy Authority, sort of thanks to Arthur's best practices and introduction to the technology, went off and running with basically creating digital twins of rural powerhouses. And really that was my sort of first window on this world, but I'll give Arthur a proper introduction here. He spent a decade as a tech specialist for the Alaska Slope Regional Corporation before becoming the founder and CEO of Totalview, a company that specializes in disrupting industrial virtual technologies. From aerial LiDAR to photorealistic digital twins, Arthur and his team work to touch every facet of XR, reality capture, and their business implications. Equally at home in remote communities as industrial facilities, Totalview has been to over 100 Alaskan villages and 50 industrial complexes since its inception 5 years ago. So Arthur, before you jump into sort of the tech that you're working on, give us your career pathway. How did you end up in XR?
So I started off, I'm a lifelong Alaskan, and I started off with a couple of the quintessential Alaskan young man duties where you use your body for going out there in wildland firefighting, and you do that for your summers in between school. I didn't have much proclivity for school early on, so I dropped out of UAA after only one semester of electrical engineering and started doing that. Found that had enough energy to maybe make my way up to another physical venue, which was Alaska's North Slope, working construction on pipelines up there in Kuparuk and Alpine. End up being such a warm, lovely place that I stayed for a decade, going from construction to asset and operating integrity in the field, all the way over to health, safety, environmental, and then training, which then led me to start going into PowerPoints and start explaining to a bunch of new hires what they were doing up in this frozen wasteland. And it kind of transforms from this really flat, beautiful place in the wintertime to this, or in the summertime, to this super desolate place with just industrial infrastructure and not a lot of light. And you have to explain all this stuff where you can't take someone out to a pipeline, or you can't take them out 30 miles to the seawater facility that they're going to be working on. It's super dangerous. In my first hitch up there, which is what we call a 2-week rotation, my mind fresh abuzz from wildland firefighting, where you were expected to kind of handle your own business. And if you left a water bottle back, 5 miles somewhere, you'd hike back and get it if it was your responsibility. I tried to do that in the wintertime, 5 miles, and was promptly stopped by my supervisor at the door, but I almost made it out there, geared up, but, ready to walk myself across the frozen oil field to get something that I thought was important. So it kind of drove home to me the need to have better visual tools in dangerous areas that have a lot of industrial infrastructure and harsh weather conditions, to be able to explain this stuff to young Alaskan kids like myself, or anyone else beyond. I mean, the tools kind of just started speaking for themselves when I started realizing that they were planning big industrial projects using nothing more than Polaroids and a few other technological tools on the North Slope. So that got me and a few ConocoPhillips people and some other founding members of Totalview interested in looking at 360 initially, which is what Chris McConnell and I first started talking about, was 360-degree stuff, and it quickly just rolled from there. So that's how I found my way into this space, and ever since then, the mixture of industry and the kind of the state of Alaska and other agencies have pushed myself into looking into aerial and drones and LiDAR and bathymetry and extended reality, game engines, you name it. So it's a big, vast space, and look forward to talking about it with you guys more.
Thank you, Arthur. And let's jump in and see. This is an example of some of Totalview's work, and I'll let Arthur walk it through. If you want to share your screen, Arthur.
You want me to share my screen now?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to start off with an application that Chris and I made here for Quigilinguk, which is a place we've been visiting several times here over the last year in order to try and develop virtual tools for the local community, the kids, everyone at the school, to be able to decide what this is useful for and how it kind of goes forward into the XR spectrum. So we've done a significant amount of droning with some DJI products up there. We've gone and done interior LiDAR of some tank farms, barge headers, all sorts of different infrastructure that is important into in the community. And in this way, we're able to kind of demonstrate from the ground and the air, the entire energy ecosystem that Chris is trying to explain to a myriad of different stakeholders. So you got young people trying to understand what careers entail out here. You got operators and people in town trying to write programs together on what the best practice is for maintaining this critical infrastructure before it gets to a point that it can no longer service its function. And to do this, you have to understand how to get out to the facilities and how to get out to rural Alaska, and then how to maintain the equipment and get it out there to start capturing these conditions. So Totalview does a lot of focus in the actual equipment and the technology that is involved in rendering and capturing all of this photorealistic stuff. And then there's so many different disparate programs that we kind of aggregate them all underneath a single portal on the web, as well as building a desktop application, which I'll show you here in a moment. And this goes and can take you then inside of a variety of different web applications, Matterport being one of them that we use. And this is what the state of Alaska used in 182 of their villages for creating digital twins out there. We can get some photorealistic photogrammetry measurement capabilities and walk around capabilities right here from the web for any number of different people to be able to explore and use to communicate. So a few examples being the state of Alaska, they have a lot of contractors who have significant questions when it comes to bid packages or being able to communicate conditions for what exactly the scope of work is going to be on a rural powerhouse or a tank farm. And this right here enables them to communicate both with operations in the village over a 3G connection and with all other stakeholders to kind of get everyone on the same page. One of the hallmarks of the project was that the state funded the kind of initial creation of all of these digital twins. So now we have a single kind of benchmark of all of these facilities from the 2020 to 2021 timeframe. So other than this, we started realizing that the web could only handle so much and that you need computing power, whether it be a laptop or a desktop, in order to run some more, let's say, heavy digital twin applications. And this is where industry kind of pushed us with LiDAR scanners. They demand kind of that you use these really high-end type scanners from engineering firms to get that 3 to 5 millimeter precision that they need for pipes and for doing engineering work. And so we thought, what can we do with all of that data inside of a game engine to make it interactive as well? And without kind of going over my time limit here, let's just say that there's been some really interesting things, having people being able to drive equipment, run around, and fly in this kind of environment here. All using the same data that we collect from, or that other engineering firms typically collect from their scanners or from their drones.
Arthur, and where are you falling in the spectrum here of AR, VR, mixed?
Well, so I would say that AR, as applied to over real life scenarios like what the HoloLens is, we don't do much in terms of headsets because they're still pretty ergonomically heavy and difficult for a lot of people in the industrial space to use. So we tend to stay in what you can see on a screen or what you can see in a mobile app. And in that way, we kind of keep ourselves with a toe in the water with the advancing technologies and what everyone's going to be wearing on their heads. And we have a few different headsets ourselves that we experiment with, but they are they're still kind of in their infancy, despite all the money that's being spent on them right now.
Arthur, thanks a ton. We'll circle back and get some sort of crosstalk between the group, but I'm gonna move over and introduce Dr. Richard Webb of Designori, a evangelist for the technology, and I think his enthusiasm will be apparent immediately. I've learned a great deal from him in just a handful of conversations, but Dr. Webb describes himself as a recovering academic, a reality spectrum evangelist who's attempting to extend his own reality as a small business owner in Alaska with occasional forays outside. Richard is quote unquote retired from the University of Alaska Anchorage, where among other things, he was activity director of the Robust Online Learning Project, which had a more than $2 million budget. And he was the first studio director of UAA's Innovative Design Studio. Richard holds a master in human resources development, a doctorate in instructional design with an emphasis on digital interface, and has spent a lifetime working in the arena of human learning. He has been richly rewarded by the experience and is endeavoring to return the favor. Richard, take it away.
All right. Well, everybody else was starting with the pathway. So my pathway, I was doomed from the beginning because I was that child in school that was bored out of their mind. They didn't have ADHD back then, but I was a classic ADHD. I was hyperactive, bored in school, but incredibly interested in what was going on. So that's pretty much been my whole life throughout. And if you turn around here and you see all of this stuff, this is my ADHD support network here. I take everything in my mind and I put it out into the world. Well, you can do that, I've discovered, with digital technologies. And so as time progressed, I kept learning more and more. I traveled throughout the world, Africa, China. I think I've been on most continents, spent time in China and so forth. And as I was developing, I was watching this technology develop as well. And then, of course, with the advent, I love to play games. I was a gamer. I was online. But now this technology is starting to develop at a point where we're able to seriously challenge a lot of what education was previously. That education that I felt like lost in is now, we're now able to recreate a world that is engaging and that it provides agency to the user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of run through. We'll see if I can manage this. I'm just going to run through. I think you said 3 minutes in your
Give or take, Richard. I'll blow the whistle on you if it goes.
All right. Well, this is going to be a speed dating here. So let me share my screen. Okay, share. So you should be able to see extended reality. Can you see that? The extended reality umbrella. Okay, so you have the umbrella. And I would argue that VR, AR, MR, those are really modalities, but they're all part of the same entity. And then you can see below, there are all these other elements that are affecting it. So what I kind of wanted to wrap my brain around this thing. And then I discovered, you know what, this is not our first rodeo. We've done this before. In fact, we've done it twice before. We did it in right around the turn of the century in the 1900s with the whole automotive revolution. But more importantly, we did this back in the beginning of the 1800s. The electromagnetic spectrum was being born. Faraday's famous experiment that magnetism and electricity are the same thing. And we began to create this spectrum. We discovered light was in a spectrum. That we've known that for a while. But then you could do infrared, or you could do ultraviolet, and then there were X-rays and gamma rays, and we could now move out into radio waves. There's this entire spectrum that is well organized, and we built our scientific revolution on it. Think of a world without electric motors, without the reality, or without the electromagnetic spectrum. You don't know what, you can't really understand how to make an electric motor. So what I kind of thought was, you know what, we're entering another spectral situation here. And I believe what it is I'm calling it the reality spectrum. And this is my first iteration of it. I have a more recent iteration, but you can see here, just as the spectrum of natural light, of light that we can actually visualize, I've sort of taken that and layered in there, or banded in there, the lived reality. That's the thing we're experiencing right now. Then you have captured reality. Arthur was just talking about the whole process of capturing reality, whether it's with videos or with LiDAR scanning. Then you go out and you model this. You can put that into 3D models, or a variety of other form factors that allow you to understand what it is you're dealing with. Then we have played reality, which is sort of like game engines, where you can put the headset on, you can enter into this environment, and you can actually play with that, with the elements. But the beauty of it is if you make that lived reality, if you get that as accurate as possible, you can actually recreate the real world with this technology. Then I have informed reality, which is, in essence, is taking the data and using it. All right, so here we go with the speed dating. This is what we do as a company. Okay, day in the life. There's Matt Moore. He's one of our, let me turn the sound off. He works for Designori. He goes down to the emulsification product asphalt testing lab, and he spends the day there. And we capture all of that. Next thing that happens is we then, well, here, let's take a look at the site itself. So we want to capture everything about it. So you see right here, you can see that little cottage there. What we're going to do, that's our asphalt testing lab. We went in and we did point cloud. We used our our $20,000 tape measure, as we call it, and we captured that entire testing lab. And here's the part that I like the best, is right there. When we capture it down to the trash can and the boxes stuffed under it. Like, we want to capture reality, not the real life, not just, what we'd like it to be. Then we can turn it into a model. We can turn it into a layout. We can add information. That's augmented reality right there. You're taking a map and you're putting information about it. So this is not our first rodeo. We've been doing this for a long time. And of course, this is government controlled, so you gotta have the forms built in. And now, so here, and also up close and personal, we want this to be as accurate as possible. And then here's the secret sauce. We then take that, you can see on the right, that's the actual reality. That's the one that we went down there and spent the day. And now we transform that exact same experience into VR. And you can see that scale right there. That's an accurate scale. All of the physics of this are accurate. The viscosity of the asphalt oil. Remember, I showed you that kind of detail in the video before. You see that green? That's an overlay. That's called scaffolding in instructional design, where you're teaching the student how to do it. But then we can turn that off, and they're gonna do it on their own. Okay, now and then here's the full experience. This is off of a laptop, but you can see what we did is we built where is it? Right there. So you can see there's the testing lab. You can put the headset on, and this will swing back by here in a second. Come on, there. So we have a tutorial that you can do with it. We have simulations, so we can have fire breaking out, or we can have problems that result. And so the simulation then allows us to train the trainees or students on what to do. We have a sandbox, so they can just jump in there and play, because I'm a big fan of play. And then you can use the controls to kind of make the thing, speeds things up, make it more difficult. Here you can see at the beginning, what's one of the first things you want to do is you want to put on your PPEs. I don't know if I jumped too far on that. Anyway, so, but you can see here they are, they're going through the entire experience. This is about 45 minutes long, and it's a training scenario. And they're going through the experience of what it is to be a lab tech, a asphalt lab tech in that environment is not just visually accurate, it's dimensionally accurate, down to the millimeters. And you can run your students, and again, you can see all these different operations, all of those pieces of equipment, like that timer works, this computer right here works. The beautiful thing about this is that's an operational computer inside of this VR experience. So we can actually type on that computer. We can use that computer to run the devices. And you see over on the side there, you have the printer. We can actually take a printer and have it print in VR, and it prints out a page, or we can also have it print out on a real printer in the real world.
Richard,
so Richard, twins. Yeah.
Can I jump in for a minute? And
go for it.
A lot of the focus for me in my work in ANEEE and the energy world is human capacity and how this XR is a tool to increase capacity. So asking a sort of brass tacks question. So using this sort of process to train one of the techs, do you have evidence? Does this, we can see some obvious things, simulating a fire is better than a real fire. But what are the results as far as performance and training on this sort of the VR simulation you have here versus the training that would have happened, say, 5-10 years ago?
Well, there's two answers to that. There's one, the anecdotal answer, and the other, there's the referee journal answer. The anecdotal evidence is that it's from, like, for example, Matt, the person you saw who went down, the employee of Designori who went down to the site and spent time there. Our evidence, our anecdotal evidence that shows that it's just as good, certainly right out of the box, as it would be if you were doing it in real life. But the added bonus to this is you can repeat it over and over. And one of the major benefits is your supervisor, right, can literally then take a look at what all of this is recorded. Your supervisor can then take a look at your experience and can identify areas where you didn't get things right. So, there are 20 steps and you should be able to do it in 20 minutes. You missed 2 steps completely. 3 steps you did, but you did them poorly. So we're going to focus on those 5 steps. I can go back in and just run them through the steps they've missed. And another one of the elements, for example, of expertise that we've learned in terms of instructional design, expertise is not just doing everything exactly right every time you do it, it's doing it at speed. It's almost to the point that embodied cognition. You don't think about it. You're just doing it, and you're doing it quick, and you're doing it right every time. That's what expertise means. We can actually run this to the point where we can have a fairly high level of confidence that they're going to get it right. Now, the second part, the refereed journal, the actual research, that's something that we're working on right now. We're doing a project with Kenai Peninsula College. TCC is a conference that's coming up. We're going to be submitting a paper to that conference. And what I'm really looking forward to is doing bona fide research with this, of actually setting up research settings, research projects where we can and compare the two. Let's compare apples to apples and see how that goes. That's something that hasn't really been done a lot, and that we need that to happen in order to really sort of reach the point where we can say with certainty that this has value.
And Richard, I think that goes exactly to sort of why XR, the practical applications. And I think it's great that this is a real company training real human beings in Alaska. And I want to, if it's okay, return to the sort of practical after we get to Jay's presentation.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
As I've said, I'm a recovering academic. Don't get me lecturing. I'll be at it all day. So
I could not have guessed. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Jay with an introduction here. Jay reached out to me in email, and it looks like, this, like many things in Alaska, a large, big, and very small state. He had seen some work that we had done with the utility out in Iliamna, and showed me some of the solutions and the practical applications that his company, Kartorium, some of our information put Kartorium Solutions, but Jay's company is actually just called Kartorium. And Jay is a senior software consultant and developer with experience working on 3D, AR, and VR projects for large Fortune 500 companies, including Amazon and GE. Jay has also worked projects as a web developer and business analyst for software integrations and data migrations in the oil and gas industry. Jay, how did you end up squarely 2 feet in the VR, AR, XR world?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, honored to be here. I've worked in the past with both Richard and Arthur. I've learned a ton from them. So just glad to be on a panel with them, I guess. Yeah, so my background is in software development, computer science back in university. And then my first job out of college was working on VR and AR and different 3D applications. I did move on from there to more boring sort of web development, just because there was more consistency in that work, right? I mean, just to be completely honest about it, there was a lot. This was 6 or 7 years ago now. There was a lot of hype around VR. There was a lot of hype around AR, but the actual implementations of it were still really clunky. And I think even Arthur mentioned this, that it is still that way in some ways. And so, yeah, moved on from there to more practical things, I guess, to use a dirty word there. But the more and more industrial clients that I worked with across Alaska, the more I saw this common problem of data availability. And it really, it speaks to both the training aspect that I know you're really passionate about, Chris, but also just sort of data-driven decisions, maintenance, operations, all these things. The people who need to know stuff don't necessarily have access to the information, even that does exist, that their organization actually has. And so I started looking into how can we make all the information that an organization has more available in a more compelling way. And turns out that using 3D tech, using mixed reality as the backdrop, the way of delivering all of that information is a really good solution. To piggyback on what Richard said about the effectiveness, there is quite a bit of literature out there showing that a training, for example, knowledge transfer that has a 3D element instead of 2D, and that is interactive instead of passive, you can expect about twice the effectiveness in terms of long-term retention of the information. So there definitely is some literature to pull from, but I agree, there's plenty more research to be done directly with showing the efficacy of VR training. Real quick, I can flash my screen in front of you guys to show you the cloud platform that we've built. Certainly won't take too much time. Can you see it?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, so just real quick, coming back to that, organizations have tons of information, whether it's operations and maintenance manuals or drone imagery, or just pictures that someone took of from their phone while they were out on site or whatever. But the issue is that not everyone has access to it, and they're not managing it super well. So what our platform does is allow the combination of maps, so GIS information that a lot of companies again already have, 3D worldwide terrain there with any 3D model. So if it's a CAD model that their engineering department already has, or if it's a drone flyover like some of the really cool stuff Arthur was showing, or an artistic rendering, even any of those things. And then lastly, spherical images, like has come up already, something Matterport does really well. The combination of all of these things, again, is the backdrop for the information that's pertinent. And so if I just jump into one of the sites here, this is a drone mapping we did of a Golden Valley Electric substation. So it's, the level of detail that you can get to here, just from photogrammetry and a little bit of CG cleanup. Again, to show, you can measure stuff in order to troubleshoot this area, see if you can get a bucket truck, up to certain spots, simple things like that. But I think the really cool element of the platform is that you can call anything out and then associate information with it. In this case, just a really simple, service log. You can do equipment specifications, literally any text, image, document attachment, video, anything like that. And another thing that we're really proud of is the direct integration with other data sources. So this shows just direct integration with Google Drive, for example. And we just plop, all of the images that we took in the drone flyover right here available, in line with the digital twin, so that you're not double and triple storing all of your files. You're just pulling all of these different data sources together. Real lastly, just to show the other kind of scene, I suppose, being the 360, again, useful for what it is, to have these virtual walkthroughs, and again, to be able to pull in other sources of information, direct integration here with Sketchfab, which I'm a huge fan of, to be able to pull in other 3D models and things like that. Again, the point here is not to replace any of these, other really powerful reality capture tools and file management and asset management and all of these other softwares that are out there. Really just trying to nail down what would be the easiest way for a non-technical person to get to all of this information, so on their second day on the job, they can just click on the pump and have everything they need to know about that piece of equipment. So that's the spiel. That's what we're up to.
Thank you, Jay. And Jay has mentioned that he got involved or had some good conversations with King Cove, the sort of city planners, and in that realm, I've found with all three of these companies that some of the work that I think Arthur was, I mentioned, instrumental with at Alaska Energy Authority. And I know Dr. Webb did not talk about some training modules he's done for AVTech, the Alaska Vocational and Education Training Center in the maritime of driving tugboats. And returning again to the King Cove city planners, is that I've seen when you get to that higher level of people, decision makers, that the cliche seeing is believing seems to cut through a lot of barriers, so that if you are explaining something to a legislator in Juneau that has been sort of seeing these issues in rural Alaska powerhouses for 20 years, now you show it to them this way and they have an innate understanding. In King Cove, when you try to tell the residents why you're doing something, how this is going, they have an innate understanding. When you show a kid out in the Bering Straits region what it means to operate a tugboat, it's visceral. And so I think that part of the human capacity, not just the person experiencing or using, the end user, it is some of the decision makers, the funders. And I think this is really, we're on the cusp of this being not old hat, but everybody will sort of have some level of familiarity with this technology. And so I have a thesis, I'll throw it out there and you guys can judge where it is. In Alaska, when we think about what are the sort of innovations that have brought people together in our state that is so vast, I'm going to throw out a couple, and I mean it when I say the potlatch, that in real life gathering of people together to share experiences, to share customs for trading, commerce, culture. The airplane being next, that brought people together. It made us less remote. It shared information again. And then I would say the cell phone. I've skipped over the internet, but we all know in Alaska, there are broadband issues still in great parts of our state. But I think the cell phone was this way to stay in contact, trade information. And then in the world we work in, a lot of technical assistance and troubleshooting happens over inefficiently, but more efficiently than getting on an airplane without the right parts or tools. And so I'm positing that XR has the potential to sort of be that impactful. And as it rolls out, what are some of the use cases maybe we haven't talked about? And Glenn, I'd love for you to jump in here because I think that you have sort of maybe a more outside perspective, international, developing world. Where is the military using it in remote circumstances? But I'll let you guys take it away, agree or disagree with this premise, and where are we today as far as making that impact?
I would agree with you that I think there's some power here that in the context in which you described it, in the environment in which you describe it, I think these virtual reality and extended reality technologies really could play a significant role in upscaling people's knowledge, education, and abilities to be able to do 21st century skills that otherwise are just going to be forgotten and overlooked. Because we've talked about this before. There are ways, when I sat in Baghdad, Iraq, with no internet and had to complete schooling, it was a matter of having discs mailed to me where I could actually sit in my own space and I could do work, and then have that one connection every now and then where I could blast off an assignment back to the States where I could get my grade. Why can't something like that be established where we have the ability to, as one of us talked before about training a lineman to do remote power work without having to fly in a technician? Why not have on a terabyte thumb drive the ability for that person to be able to plug into a computer, use a headset, and go through and visualize not only the part task training that you need for just that specific ailment, but maybe training that would advance their careers or their knowledge so that they could be even more instrumental in their communities, where you have become less reliant on technology because technology is not always there, but you still need the knowledge in order to be able to fix and live out there in those spaces. I mean, you were talking to Richard, and one of the things that came up, when talking about lived reality, I think what's really cool about what they're doing with their company is they're really, in the simulation world, we talk about fidelity and we talk about resolution. Resolution is generally visual. It's, how many pixels on your screen and how sharp is the picture. But then there are these psychological and physical fidelities of these worlds where the ability to have the psychological fidelity and the physical fidelity be so high, it allows people to learn a lot of things that they otherwise couldn't learn unless they were physically in the situation, in the event, in the environment. they just couldn't do it any other way until that thing happened to them. So I see the ability of a lot of this where we are today. It's funny, when I was in Iraq and I got asked about the Iraqi army at the time, I said the Iraqi army was the US Army in the 1980s. That's kind of the level that they were at. And they were extremely proficient at that level. From what I know, and it's a very little about what you guys, how you've described Alaska and some of its challenges, I would say that, Alaska is 20 or 30 years maybe behind infrastructure wise in some of the rest of the country. But so what did we do 20 or 30 years ago? We were still using computing technology. We weren't doing everything we weren't wireless, we were wired, and we were connected to power cords. And so the ability to pass on and to advance a lot of the activities that are going on, be it education, be it training, be it visualization, be it, some of the mapping work is fantastic that you guys are doing with your LiDAR and your point clouds. We can do that stuff today for people. And even with the limitations that exist. And I think that's kind of what I'm seeing that these three companies are doing. It's really kind of opening the eyes of folks who have been in an environment where, I get asked all the time, how can we do this thing with technology? And I always stop and I go, okay, well, what's wrong with doing it the way we do it today? And then why do we want to bring the technology in? I think in these particular cases, what you're talking about is you're being able to bring some of this knowledge and these skills to people who don't have access to it. And Richard and I were talking about this the other day. It's not a poverty issue from a money standpoint. It's a poverty issue from access to resources like high-tech facilities where you can do things, or high-tech visualization so that you can really understand what's going on. This will allow those folks in those areas that have power, that have access to cell phone coverage, to now be able to have some of the things that people in New York City have, right? That they take for granted on a regular basis.
Yeah, and if I could jump in here to follow up on that, our conversation yesterday, one of the things that Glenn and I agreed on was, the starting point is not the technology. The starting point is the person, is the people, is the community. And in terms of designery, our approach is very much that, but also it's like Alaska specific. So when we're looking at how do we get VR out to rural Alaska, you sort of start with the situation there. So one of the things that we found was there was internet, but the quality of it, the bandwidth issue was a problem, but also it was interrupted on a somewhat regular basis. And so and another situation, which I think, Chris, you and I have spoken about how community centers tend to be where people come together in community centers rather than trying to get, culturally trying to get out into each individual location. There are all sorts of things that start in the place where the humans are, where people are. And we need to take our technology and adapt it to that. So what we did, we everything we build, we make sure that it doesn't need super high bandwidth. We make sure that this is something we learned from working with construction companies, with Alaska, that if there's an interruption, that it doesn't destroy the break or the link and you lose everything that you had on both sides. You can actually, once it drops, you pause the communication, but you can continue to use the application. But then when the link is reacquired, now you just upload everything that you've been recording while the link was down. And another thing we talked about yesterday is, we're in the golden age of thumb drives right now. This is like a hard steel. There's a gig on this thing. It's hard steel, and you can pop it out so we can easily send these out. We don't necessarily have to send a whole educational team out. We can send this, and the educational team is there.
Thank you, Richard. As we creep up on 1 o'clock and have some time for Q&A, I'm going to read one from Ryan Witten, and this is for all panelists. Have you seen any organizations that pair XR with education or workforce development? We have a large gap between the existing human capital and the needs of the workforce. These needs will only be amplified as infrastructure funding and work expands. What opportunities and challenges do you see in these areas? Let me tee you up. Arthur, were you online for that?
I am. Yeah, so I can't speak to many organizations that accomplish this because, quite bluntly, the people who write checks for education and the people who have enough money to afford XR are oftentimes different. So if you have a big industrial organization, we work with a couple that have, multiple different departments that can kind of talk to each other, then yeah, we can throw in the education component of it. But I imagine that you have to have certain clients that have educational budgets in order to be able to really fully integrate that aspect in there. And again, that's the disparate element that kind of exists right now. You could have scans go for a specific engineering purpose at a facility that have nothing to do with education. And as soon as education or someone wants a training of, and we're not just talking of maybe a small room, but of a whole, a whole pad or several acres or, a facility, the return on investment for a lot of those groups for spending in the tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars and lots of man hours to develop it frequently doesn't align with what their budgetary availability is.
Go ahead.
I'll throw a couple of examples. I know from the Defense Department's perspective and defense contractors' perspectives, we're seeing companies like Lockheed Martin, Airbus, the United States Army, the United States Navy are all starting to experiment with, well, the companies are actually employing augmented reality technologies in some of their maintenance facilities and some of their production facilities to actually substitute manuals and laptop computers that have instructions on them for techs actually working, building aircraft and building other things. The military is now looking to try to find areas and ways to look at things like, if I have to do firefighting on a ship in a very closed space with now suddenly no light, where are all the lines, electrical lines, the gas lines, the power line, the water lines, the pumps, all of those things, I can put on augmented reality and now I get a sense of these spaces for things like firefighting and know where the shutoff valves are when I can't see potentially. Reverse side being, hey, what about doing arson investigations after the fact? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to put on augmented reality, a headset to see what the building, the digital twin was before the house burned down, to then help the investigation of figuring out how the house burned down. So you're to your question, there industries with deep pockets, and who are seeing writing on the wall where some areas and industries are moving or investing in doing that now and experimenting with it. Where you are seeing it in an education space, and I'm at the graduate university level, but there's a really strong push at the university levels to try to integrate augmented virtual realities into the classroom. But we keep going back to the same question of, why do we do this? Why is it that we want to integrate an augmented reality into the classroom? In an engineering space, if I'm a mechanical engineer and I want to use it in a lab to try to teach students how to do things with mechanical materials and electrical engineers, those makes absolute sense. But how does it make sense for a political scientist or an English major, or maybe just somebody who is learning about foreign cultures? Maybe it's not as applied there. So in those spaces, you're seeing a lot of either pushback or just lethargy to accepting the technology, because they really don't see how it's going to improve the education or what they do for their jobs in support of education. But in areas where it makes sense, and then I would say in production and in mechanicals and some of the sciences, that you are seeing some labs, especially labs, that are now starting to use the augmented reality technologies.
Chris, can I share my screen here a second I'd like to follow up what Glenn just said.
Go
So-
ahead. And
Okay.
while you do that, I'll just mention that, again, through the Denali Commission funding and the Alaska Energy Authority, there's a bulk fuel training that utilizes some of the technologies we've seen here so that folks can, take proper care of their tank farms. And that was COVID inspired. So, Ryan, to your question of, where is workforce need being met by this? There's a public example with not necessarily deep pockets, but I think that's a innovative pilot program. Go ahead, Richard.
So you were mentioning, Glenn, about political science or what. This is one that we've done for the native village of Eak. It's for their cultural center. But you can see here, it's a whole fairly long video, but you can see the, this is a 10,000-year-old archaeological site. It's an actual archaeological site that we've recreated using VR. We went down to the cultural center, the Alaska Native Cultural Center, and we scanned their longhouses. That's the Eak River there. All of the different elements of this. I don't, actually, can you hear that? Probably not. Let me stop share and share again, and then turn the sound. I'm going to turn the sound on. So listen to the sound here. Okay.
Gulchakalag aduttashe. Gatskahak aduttashe. Ganu dachnahak aduttashe.
So that's an elder speaking in the Eak language. And interesting thing, when we showed this to some other folks, to the tribal village of Igiagik, their immediate reaction was, we can use this for language learning.
Yes.
And so, and here you have the cultural norms, and you can, and everything from they're fishing, and here I can go a little bit further out. All of the different elements. Here's the dressing of fish. Now this is phase one. We can make this more accurate over time. But now you're experiencing what it was like to live in that Eak land, several thousand years ago. And here's berry picking, and we have here's fishing with the I guess it's not called spear fishing, it's called stab fishing. But just what jumps out to me, Glenn, is the idea that it doesn't have to be a technical. It can be very much cultural or very much experiential.
Oh, absolutely. I thought the question was more geared towards, and this is where we get in the nuances of XR, AR, VR. You're exactly right in that application of virtual reality and the potential of all of those things that you can do in that virtual world. From an augmented reality standpoint, I think of guys standing in factory having problems with a procedure, and instead of having to go to a manual, can literally have a headset on, and there are indicators, green and red lights that are actually indicating how things get connected and how to twist them and where pieces go. Augmented reality versus the virtual. You actually, in that example, it looked like you had a little bit of augmented reality in the virtual world, which was the green when spear fishing. So that's a good example of what I would call mixed, blended, or even the XR piece.
And we do a bunch with IR, where we do the 360 environment high def video or photography, and then put the hotspots in, which is really where augmented reality, that's one of the places it's headed. I think eventually augmented reality is going to rule the world because you can do so many things with it. But the crossover, the cost versus versus quality issue that I believe Arthur was talking about earlier. We're still a little ways out from that, but it's coming, and it's definitely going to have a huge impact. And in terms of Arthur, I think part of what we have to change is the culture of finances, the culture of how we do things. We've got to start, like, scalability and extensibility are two factors that are huge in this. We've got to start sharing things with one another, building these environments so that it's we have a shared investment in this. And one of the things that you can do when you're using that technology, you can reuse it, or you can use it for larger groups. But extensibility, we can build something once, and now we can continually add to it, so that actually at Designori, we notice that the more we work with folks, the lower the cost, the overall cost is going to be. It may take a certain investment to get started in. And if I could give a shout out to coastal villages, we've been working a bunch with them, both with the AMTC project with the tugs, and also on their fishing fleet that they have. And there's an Alaskan community that is an organization that is making a commitment to this, and we're doing some wonderful work, and they've been incredibly supportive.
Thanks, Richard. And Ryan, thank you for that question. I put a link to, this is not an endorsement, but I think people are getting into that space of providing sort of educational modules. And I mean, I get a sense working in this space that I agree with you, Glenn, that the applications are not as obviously apparent in some of the liberal arts world, but like anything else in education, it's the passionate person that has a vision and then applies it. I'm in some of the work I've done in Quiglingok with Arthur, we put it in front of third graders, sixth graders, the gamification aspect. And, when it gets to the point, you just know once it's in their hands, it's just going to become, something else. You see yourself becoming obsolete before your own eyes there. I'm going to move on to another question from Eric O'Brien of the Denali Commission. And he asks, could Alaska create an asset map with 360 high-def images and a database identifying key facts about all infrastructure? I realize there would be privacy issues to take into account, but can also see how valuable that would be to public funders. How much of this high-def info do we have now? And maybe I'll modify that. I think we could have the technology. Maybe a more precise question is something like that within a cost picture? What are the challenges of gathering all those siloed pieces of information that might have different stakeholders ownership? Jay, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it's an obvious place to go, and I think a huge issue, honestly, with a lot of this technology is you can show how cool it all is, and you can show, if you just trust us experts, we can get you a perfect, recreation of the real world with and everything you said, Richard. It's a real computer. It really is that wow factor. But I think the only way new technologies like the spectrum of 3D tech that we're talking about really explodes and becomes ubiquitous is if it's democratized. I think that the only way to achieve this, and this in this particular example being the mapping of the inventorying of all of Alaska's infrastructure, I think it's going to be to make it as easy as possible for as many people as possible to contribute. And so what's a good example? Apple. Okay, so Apple is doing some really cool work with AR and reality capture that is available to anyone. So you got yourself a new iPhone, has a LiDAR scanner on it, and you can take a pretty impressive, me and Richard talked about this, a pretty impressive point cloud with this thing that fits in your pocket, and then you can just share that as Apple's built-in file format that you can then just view in AR. There's all of these things that are free. They're right now. And they don't cost, an expert firm coming in and doing some crazy mapping and then making it accessible. I think the piece that is still missing, and I think that Kartorium is really, really trying to figure out how to fill this gap, is how do you bring all of those different mapping efforts and different kinds of data, different file formats, all of those things into a singular portal, I guess, because the way it is right now, I know DOT is looking at how to digital twin, all of their infrastructure. I know various electric cooperatives are doing it, individual municipalities and so on, but those are so siloed. And I think the real work is going to be, how do we cross-organizationally coordinate and centralize all of that information.
Thanks for that, Jay. Arthur, you want to weigh in there?
So when I entered this industry a few years ago, I was pretty excited to see the explosion of new drones and how Apple was having LiDAR added to its phone. And I thought, yes, finally people will have the tools to be able to go out there, and you just make a kind of a place for them to all play around in. The more we played around with those tools, though, the more we had to go and jump into, as Richard said, the $20,000 camera. And even that camera is the cheapest LiDAR camera you can get. And it's for a reason. The algorithms and everything have gotten good enough to where we can kind of put good pictures and good quality onto cameras and onto phones. But the LiDAR there is really meant for placing AR dinosaurs onto tabletops and for improving photo quality. DJI is doing the same thing. Chris and I went out to Quigillinguk first with a standard set of DJI, $2,000 drones, and that you could imagine that a government program could maybe get that out far and wide to a bunch of kids to be able to learn how to fly and get their FAA 107 and start doing high detailed mapping of their own communities. And when we tried to do that, we saw that we had to upgrade the capture technology. That a lot of the hype that Apple and a lot of these places have sold us on their tech is kind of unfounded. And there's obviously, they say that computing power will get 32 times more powerful in the next 10 years. And we have a lot to go in terms of Moore's law, and automotive LiDAR is pushing the bounds on the size of LiDAR. But having played with not nearly every single tool out there now, I am highly dubious as to whether or not that you still need some kind of firm who has ground control points, an idea of spatial Cartesian coordinate points to be able to import all this. You talk about DOT going across the state. DOT doesn't do anything without survey control. And now you're talking about some, FR Bell or some company having to go along with the drones and having to do control station stuff that's still hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of work, or tens of thousands by survey places. So the scale of that project is something the state of Alaska has already taken on with the help of the Denali Commission. Everyone might have noticed there's a $480,000 match from Denali Commission plus $480,000 from the state to go out and look at bulk fuel specifically. That's not $480,000 though with match to go out and just do VR of those things. It's to go out and it's to do an inventory and assessment of them. And at the same time, our firm and a lot of other firms out there have worked with them to try and get VR tacked onto that as an additional thing that the funding can allow for. And thankfully, like you guys said, the 3D is good enough, the interaction is good enough, and has that wow factor to get people investing in the next steps of it. But we have to be realistic on where the technology is now and what the platforms are going to be required to do that.
I think we're the barriers aspect here. We don't have flying cars yet. It seems to be on the horizon here. I know another thing, I don't want to go too down a wormhole with our dwindling time here, but the Microsoft HoloLens is sort of, it seems to be the technology that's being put out there as the most cutting edge. And I know that some reports came out that the Army is feeling like it's not quite there yet. So in the challenges aspect, Glenn, can you address like where are we sort of limited with all this promise in front of us?
Well, my friend and I, who was involved in some of that, told, the Army jumped off and tried to do the most difficult case scenario possible by strapping on a headset to an airborne soldier and dropping them out of a plane and having them run around in the woods. The folks that do VR work that I work with, one of the big challenges that they have just working indoors in a room is georeferencing or geolocating the headset and making sure that everything that's being seen is actually where it's supposed to be in the world, because a degree or two that's off and you're a mess. So that whole idea of, one of the things that I love to throw out to people is, if you don't have the satellite or you don't have the network that's going to allow you to connect to some godlike entity that tells you this is the ground, this is where you are, and so you can be reconciled. Okay, I wonder how much of the information you get is actually going to be valuable. The other piece that we're seeing from an outdoor perspective is that, these things were not designed to have the sun, glare and things like that put in them. They weren't designed to have to deal with humidity. A lot of things that soldiers have to deal with, right? So, what happens when it rains? These things, okay. I mean, I laugh because I thought to myself, if you had given me one of those, the moment that I heard gunfire, it would have come off as fast off my head as a soldier in 1861's knapsack and everything came off of his back when he was going into a fight. And because all of that extra stuff just it hinders you. And I forget your question, but that was kind of, that's kind of what I've seen as some of the challenges. I mean, it's, ruggedizing some of the technologies. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we want to use it for today, it can be used for, like we talked about, like learning and teaching and exposing people to different things. I think the technology is well at hand to be able to do that. Taking it out and stretching it into, let's take this and take it outside. Let's take this into remote areas where we don't have network or satellites or these other capabilities that we require. I mean, we can't do it without those things. That's where we start getting into a stretch. And before we had the wireless, it was guys running around with backpacks on with wires coming out of them and had the headsets on, and they had to be tethered to power sources. And so it was limiting just from a form factor. Well, now the form factor is getting better, still not great, but it's better. But I think Richard and I are on the same sheet of music. I always start with the end in mind, and I ask the question, okay, what is the desired outcome that you're looking for? And then I work backwards into, how is this thing or this technology, this capability going to support you getting there? And if it's not, then it's probably the wrong tool for you. So really that drives a lot of the way that I look at it.
And we're getting down on time. I see David Chamberlain from AP&T has asked a great question that looks like Arthur and Richard are addressing about cybersecurity protocols. Yeah. Glenn, what I'm hearing from you is that the real world still has a lot of charm. We're not ready to move away from it. I'll say this in closing, and it's sort of a parallel track outside of the XR world, and that is in the ANEEE and REAP world, looking at companies that are successfully doing business in Alaska. And I think that this space shows just such a great deal of promise for Alaska, because it leverages what are commonly perceived to be barriers, our logistics, our vast distances, the inability to reach people in a timely fashion are uniquely Alaskan problems. And I congratulate you three companies on sort of being able to do business anywhere in the world. And you've chosen to do it in Alaska and shown a way to do it without any real cost there. So really honored that all of you could be here today. And Glenn, you were able to lend your expertise. I'm gonna let Greg wrap things up, and we'll be reaching out with contact information and ways to get a hold of everybody that was on the panel. And I thank everybody who attended.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And thank you to all the panelists here. Really appreciate your guys' time and sharing your expertise. And thanks to everybody who attended. I know we did a little extra long speaker series this week, and I think it was worthwhile. So appreciate everybody sticking around for the full hour and a half. And then the only other thing I'd mention is just our next week's event, talking about the Railbelt Reliability Council application that I mentioned. That'll be from 12 to 1 on March 30th. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Kaufman Engineers, for supporting this series. So with that, I'll sign off. And yeah, one last thank you to the panelists here and everybody who attended. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was a blast. Thanks, guys.
Thanks much. Take care.